So, the work hours, the work days, which is from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., there's 6 days you shall work, the seventh is a day of rest. So if we're going to use that to model God's timeline, which if that represents God's timeline, then that would mean that we have to go to it. You have to measure. You have to interpret that the way that the biblical daytime is given. You have to interpret it the way that how each work week, how the work day is given. From 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. For 6 days a week. The seventh. So on the seventh day, they didn't get up and go to work at 6 a.m. They continue to rest. So if you look at scriptures such as Psalms chapter 90 verse 4 and the corresponding verse in, I forget if it's first or second Peter, I forget which Peter it is. Chapter 3 and 8. There's 1,000 years, a day with the Lord, that's 1,000 years is a day. If you look at that, so one day equates to 1,000 years, then 12 hours equates to 500 years, if you do the math. 6 hours equates to 250 years. 3 hours equates to 125 years. 1 hour equates to 41 years and 8 months. 41 and 2/3 of a year. Okay, so if you do the math, that would mean that on God's timeline, 6 a.m. is 250 years after each new millennium begins. Okay? So on God's timeline, if you want to interpret the God's timeline properly, if you're expecting Jesus to come back at the beginning of the new millennium, at the beginning of at the first hour of the seventh day, then that would mean that Jesus would be coming back at 6 a.m. on the seventh day of God's timeline, which equates to 250 years after the seventh millennium begins. Okay? According to the missing 240 years on the Hebrew calendar, the seventh millennium began in the fall of 1999. When the Hebrew calendar said 5760, it should have said 6000 even. That was when the seventh millennium began. And the 7,000 year timeline would mean that Jesus should have returned then. In case you haven't noticed, he still hasn't returned yet. So, and this explains why we are not in that season, okay? We are not in that season. So stay with me here. So, since the seventh millennium began 23 years ago, and 6 a.m. is 250 years after each new millennium begins, so we're talking 6 a.m. 7th day God's timeline, that would equate to the correct Hebrew year, 6,250. And since the Hebrew calendar is missing 240 years, in the year that Jesus returned, it's going to actually say 6,010, which would correspond with the Gregorian calendar year, 2249, around the fall. Okay? Now, that verse in Matthew 24, I forget the exact verse. No one knows the day or hour. That means nobody knows the exact date. Jesus said nobody knows the exact date and time that Jesus would return. But we can know the season around the area. Okay? So, based on biblical information, scripture-based data, we can know about the season, the year. We might not know the exact date, but we can know around the year that Jesus would return. Okay, around the fall of 2249. Okay? So, yeah. And I go into more detail in my video, the biblical day and biblical work day. Okay? These are many videos. Pretty much samples of that, sort of. Or maybe sort of more of a sneak peek or something. Although I actually filmed those a few months ago, think around October or something. I forget when exactly I filmed it. I uploaded those videos in December, right around Christmas. And I probably need to make a redo, because I don't know if I did it properly, because I think I could have done it better. But nonetheless, I filmed those videos, and I provide plenty of biblical proof. Okay, plenty of biblical evidence. And I'm going to put those same scriptures in the description of this video. Okay? And my other videos as well. Okay?